Welcome everybody. This is Grandmaster Aleksandr Lenderman once again with you guys. And in the last course, we basically took a look at the topic of positional material sacrifices, and we went through pawn sacrifices, different kinds, exchange sacrifices, piece sacrifices, double pawn sacrifices, even queen sacrifices. And we went through a lot of computer games, some of my games, some elite players' games, but we focused a lot on computer games. In this course, however, we're going to take a step back from computer games, and we're going to focus primarily on world champions and players who came really, really close to becoming world champions. So the idea will be to show you world champions games and show you how they used material positional sacrifices in their games with big success just as well. And while not all of them might have been as mathematically sound as I showed you in the first course, especially involving computer games, but you'll see that there's also a lot of practical value in material positional sacrifices. And as we go through each part, chapter by chapter, we'll see how all of the world champions were able to use this strategy of material positional sacrifice with some great success. And they won some very nice games with that, some games that you might have even seen before. But that doesn't matter. The point is to highlight the importance of sometimes thinking out of the box and sacrificing material for positional consideration and initiative. So thank you all for buying this course. Thanks all for watching. And hopefully you'll enjoy this course, and hopefully you'll learn a lot of new things. So in part one, we're going to be going through the first two world champions, Wilhelm Steinitz and Aleksandr Lasker. And in the first three chapters of part one, I'm going to be showing you games of Wilhelm Steinitz. And in chapters 4 through 6, in this part one, we're going to be going through games of second world champion Aleksandr Lasker. And I forgot to mention that in total it's going to be 10 parts. And so looking forward to sharing you secrets of the first two world champions. It's going to be a game between Steinitz and Philipp Hirschfeld that we're going to cover in the first chapter of part one. And even though this was a game before Steinitz became world champion, well before in fact, and it was a simul game in fact, I still thought it was a very instructive game to show how Steinitz was able to punish his lower rated opponent for neglecting his development and being a little bit greedy. And he played a very nice piece sacrifice for initiative, which shows that even though Steinitz was well known for being the first revolutionary positional player, he also very well knew how to attack. So, e45, knight c3, this is called the Vienna game. Knight c3, knight f6, f4, challenging the center, and we have d5, counterattack in the center. So far so good. And now white plays d3. The other main move is f takes e5. Of course, after knight takes e4, knight f3, and there's a bunch of theory here. But Steinitz played a logical move, protecting this pawn and threatening to take this pawn and leading to a chaotic position, sort of. And now immediately black made sort of an inaccuracy. The best theoretical move is e takes f4, with the idea that if white goes e5, black will go t4 with an excellent game. And if e takes d5 after knight takes, bishop takes f4, black just plays bishop d6, and black has a very comfortable game, probably slightly better. So after f4, d takes c4 was probably inaccurate, e takes f4 was better. Instead he did d takes e4, f takes e5, knight g4, and now white played a very accurate move, because if he tries to hold on to this pawn with a move like d4, then after a move like bishop b4 or e3, position is quite complicated. But in this position he took knight takes e4, and after takes played d4. So we see already that white is going to be slightly better here. First of all, his king is relatively safe, because if black ever gives a check, white can always play knight g3, blockading the check. Second of all, white has a stronger center, because he has a d pawn, and black lost his central pawn. Black has an f pawn in return. And finally, he's going to be a little bit ahead in development, because he's going to be able to chase away the knight. And let's see how white plays for the initiative in this game. So black played knight ec6, knight f3, developing and defending at the same time, bishop g4, c3, queen e7. And here is kind of a first critical moment of the game. A lot of people in this position would just try to play it safe and play the move queen e2, just to blockade the pin. That way, if the knight gets attacked with f5, you can always just go knight g5 with a good game. But in this case, black will play knight d7, black will castle, and black will be kind of close to equality. Instead, however, Steinitz played a very nice move, much more ambitious move. He obviously did not blunder f5, because that's a very basic move to see. But clearly, he had intended on sacrificing this piece for initiative. And while nowadays it would not be very hard for a top player to find an idea like this, seeing how weak the black king is and how black is underdeveloped with his knight, rook, and bishop, and another rook not really in the game, and the queen blockading the king. But back then, in the 19th century, it wasn't such an obvious thing, so kudos to Steinitz for finding this nice idea. And now Steinitz just castled. Now, in retrospect, he could have also played bishop g5, with the idea of queen e6 to castle, so maybe that was even more powerful. But we cannot be too harsh on Steinitz. This is a simul after all. He just castled right away. Takes, takes. And now maybe the best practical chance for black was to actually give back some material. And that's something that, of course, even modern players don't always like to do, but especially players in the past. They were quite materialistic for the most part. They did not like to give back material. The best idea here would be to take on e4, rook e1, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes e1, queen takes e1, and after something like bishop e7, black has two minor pieces and a rook for the queen. Although white has some pawns and the black's king is weak, so white would still be better after a move like bishop f4. However, after castles, at least black's king is relatively safe, and black's still very much in the game. Which is why bishop g5 was slightly more accurate. But again, it was a simul, and his opponent was obviously a much weaker player, so he decided to just play queen d7, getting out of that pin. But now, white starts his onslaught. He starts with the move queen b3, which attacks this pawn and creates a lot of discomfort for black. This move is a little bit of a mosquito bite, trying to disturb black's harmony, because black now has no good defense. He does not want to play a move like b6, because after bishop g5, followed by rook e1, now his knight's even more pinned to that rook, and black really is in dire straits here. So he tried knight a5, kicking out the queen. But now, the e5 square is under white's control. So after queen c2, because of this annoying knight e5 threat, black decided to take on f3. But now the rook gets into the game quicker, and after bishop e7, white just takes this pawn. It's not so much about taking the pawn, it's more about opening up the g6 square in order to develop some kind of an attack on the king. So already, as we could see, white has 2 pawns for the piece with the massive attack. So it's becoming more and more clear that black is just in huge trouble here with black's very poor development. So black played bishop f6, queen g6, queen f7, queen f5, and now finally black had kind of enough and decided to give back the piece. Let's see what would happen if he tried to hold on to the piece. Clearly, bishop g6 is a threat, so black is limited with his options. So let's look at king f8. King f8 would run into queen c8. That's just one sample line. I'm sure there are a lot of lines that win here. Queen e8, otherwise the rook is hanging. Rook takes f6, exclam, gf, bishop h6 check, king f7, queen g4. Now bishop g6 and queen g7, there are just too many threats, so black has to take. But now after check and rook e1, white's winning the queen, and soon it's going to be mate. How about, instead of king f8, king d8? A little bit better than king f8, but still not very helpful. Bishop g6, queen e7, and now this would have set a little bit of a trap, because at least here white has to be careful. It would be a huge mistake here. In fact, such a mistake that would throw away the game, to take queen takes a5, double question mark. Do you see why? Well, whenever you're attacking, you have to always still look at opponent's ideas, because guess what? When your opponent's in trouble, they're especially very careful, and they're especially looking for ways to fight back and looking for active moves and looking for some ways to survive. It's like, don't wake up a sleeping lion. They're especially hungry during that time. So, and also you have to always look at all the checks for you and your opponent. And here, black would suddenly have a shocking turnaround with queen e1 check, rook f1 only move, and bishop takes d4, exclam, and suddenly white is just losing. Because after takes, which is the only move really, suddenly black wins the queen. And now there's no more attack, no more anything. And black's just up a queen and completely winning. So that's why you have to be careful until the very, very end, even when you're attacking. So king d8 would be a good practical try. But of course, objectively, after a move like rook d3, queen d6, h3, here, rook e6, white would still be very much under control here. White's initiative is way too strong, and white's basically winning here. But at least that was black's last chance. But after bishop takes d4, this is very easy for white, because black did give up the piece, but the fact that the queens got traded doesn't really help black very much, because black still cannot castle, and white still potentially has 4 attacking pieces. And still, even though the material is almost equal, black is only down a pawn, really it's not about that here. Black's king just cannot find shelter. Also, note that black can't castle here because of bishop e6 check. So black really is in dire straits here. Knight c6, bishop g6, now black can't castle ever, king e7, rook check, and now the attack starts. King e6, bishop d2, getting that last piece in the game, and then the next move, the rook will come as well, and now it's going to be made in a few moves. King takes d4 would lose to bishop c3 check. So king d6, only move. Bishop f4 check. King d7. Rook f7 check. King c8. Bishop f5. And checkmate. So what did we learn from this game? Well, first of all, the main point was to play for initiative. When you have a choice between queen e2, a safe looking move after which black is also safe, and a move like bishop d3, which maintains the initiative, usually you want to look for an aggressive move and really try to make that work, because even if the moves are equally good, it's going to be much harder for for your opponent to play if you're going to play in an aggressive way. So a move like bishop d3 was very, very strong. It's a very important critical moment. Now let's say black would not have gone for the piece. But then, isn't bishop d3 just a much better move than queen e2? Now compare this to the other position. Now white can, let's say, play rook e1, already get the rook in the game, and black already has to worry about a lot of things, with the knight x-raying the rook, x-raying the queen, and black has to worry a lot about the discoveries, and black really is not in great shape. Whereas after queen e2, after knight d7, nothing scary is happening, because white's also now has to worry about how to complete his development. So that was the first important critical moment. And then another thing we learned was to play energetically, continue playing energetically, continuing to create threats, moves like queen b3, and so on. And then eventually it was an execution. Now black could have played more stubborn with queen d8, setting up some traps. And then, of course, white would have to be careful to look at his opponent's ideas as much as he does at his ideas. And finally, the execution was nice. It was just basically forced checkmate, and Steinitz executed it brilliantly. Chapter 2. In this chapter, we're going to continue looking at Steinitz's games, and now we're going to move on 15 years ahead to his first World Championship match. And fittingly, we're going to start with his first round game of the match against Zukertort. And that was the first ever official World Championship match that was played. Zukertort was a very worthy opponent, but as you'll see in this first game, Steinitz immediately started with a bang. Immediately showed a very nice flash of brilliancy, which wasn't so obvious back then to players in the 19th century. People would sacrifice pawns in the opening. They played gambits. They sacrificed a lot for concrete attacks, but positional sacrifices weren't as common. And I thought this game was very nice because this not only introduced an attacking idea, but also had some positional factors in as well. So without further ado, let's take a look at this game. It started with d4, Steinitz replied with d5, Zukertort played c4, and Steinitz played what's now called the Slav defense, c6, ultra solid. White played e3, bishop f5, knight c3, cd is also another line. After cd, queen b3. Black's main move is usually queen c7, counterattacking this bishop. And after knight c3 to play e6, and I think the current theory says that black is supposed to be fine here. For more information about a line like this, you can take a look at my game from the US Championship in 2016 against super strong player Aleksandr Lenderman. I did lose the game, but the opening I thought was very interesting, and certainly black was fine there. But if you're interested more in that line, this is maybe one of the games to look at. In the game though, white just played knight c3 and black played e6. Now an important thing about this opening is that if black starts with this move and then goes bishop f5, then already here takes queen b3 would be quite unpleasant for black, because now the same of queen c7 of course doesn't work, because now the rook protects the bishop. So now it's already awkward for black too in how to defend this. b6 is just way too weakening, whereas bishop c8 is probably the best move, but it's not a very ideal move to play, so white should be slightly better in this symmetrical structure. So that's why bishop f5 first very often is a clever move, even though we're taught to develop knights before bishops usually, but every rule has an exception, and the main idea is to make sure after queen b3 to have queen c7 while this bishop's unprotected. And once knight c3 is played, black gets e6 in, and now of course d5 is solidly protected. So now most people might already know this, but back then in the 19th century that was quite good creative play by Steinitz. Knight f3, knight d7. And now white plays an interesting move, which maybe it doesn't quite work out for him in the game. He's playing for space advantage on the queen side with this move a3. However, that might be a little bit too slow of a strategy, because as you'll see, black is going to be able to build up a very nice pressure on the king side. Now, of course, c5 right away would not be so good maybe, because after b6, b4, a5, perhaps you can't maintain the space. However, that was actually interesting, because here white has this move b5, and really the position here is unclear, because this, of course, it would be very bad, because after c6 or even bishop takes b5, white's just doing basically winning actually, because after this we have takes, very strong idea, takes, knight e5, and as soon as the queen moves, queen f4, and suddenly white has a huge initiative. So actually the best move is to take perhaps, but after takes here, an idea like c7 is very strong, because after takes, bishop b5, again, white has huge initiative here. If the king moves, knight d7, we already know what the problem is with that move. Very strong move e4. And for those of you who watched my first course, this might also remind you of one of the computer games, where e4 was a powerful break. Takes, takes, and suddenly white gets a huge attack here. Anyway, that's a little bit of a diversion. In fact, after b5, white is actually better here. So black actually has to be careful. He can't really just take advantage of the fact that a5, a3 doesn't work due to this. So perhaps if white really wanted to play c5, maybe c5 right away was actually a better idea, because a3 turned out to be a loss of a tempo. But Sukertort played a3, and now black played bishop d6. And that was another point of c5 right away. Black would not be able to develop this bishop to as good of a square, because as we'll see, this bishop in the long run is going to be quite strong on this b8 h2 diagonal. It's going to apply a lot of pressure here, and later on in the game it's going to play a very, very big factor. So white naturally continues with his strategy, and now black plays e5. Since his bishop is well placed on c7, he's able to put a lot of pressure in the center with e5. So e5, bishop e2. Perhaps it was possible to take here, and after takes, play knight d4 with a decent enough position. At least black's not going to be able to play e4 with the pawn like he did in the game. Bishop e2, knight gf6. Maybe it made sense to start off with e4 actually, and after knight d2, queen g5, and then knight f6. But certainly Steinitz's move was fine as well, knight f6, although it does give white another chance to take on e5. But chances are, if they did not do it previous move, they're not going to do it the next move as well. So naturally, Sukertort just continued his development with bishop b2 and consolidating his queenside position. And now finally black plays e4, knight d2. And here's sort of first critical position. So the pawn structure has been fixed. Black has this pawn chain going from b7 to e4, and white has this pawn chain from f2 to c5, and also pawns from a3 to b4 to c5, holding up the space on the queen side. What does that tell us? That white's gonna play on the queen side, white's play is on the queen side, and black's play is on the king side. So black has a good chance for a kingside attack here. So therefore, what should black do? Well, the very conventional approach would have been to castle. But that would be a mistake, because after castles b5, now it's going to be much harder for black to develop his attack. So sometimes castling automatically is not the best move. Sometimes certain positions require us for something a little bit more unconventional. And here black plays a brilliant move. He played the move h5, exclaim. He's going for an attack. He wants to play knight g4 and then queen h4, and he really wants to use the fact that this pawn is on e4 takes away the f3 square from the knight, and he sees that he's going to have a lot of good future on the king side. And in some cases, he doesn't need to be castled on the king side, because in a closed position, he doesn't need to be castled so quickly, because it's going to take a while for the game to open up. And he can castle any moment anyway. And sometimes the king might even be better somewhere like f8. Whereas the rook very often we castle to try to get the rook in the game, but here very often the rook can even come like this. So this was a very nice unconventional decision, which, basically instead of automatically just castling because of the idea of castling, he sees the need of the position and he plays what the position asks for. A very nice play. White played h3 because he saw that after b5, knight g4 would already be very dangerous. h3, let's say, queen h4, and suddenly black has huge initiative here. For example, if white castles, knight takes e3, f takes, bishop takes h3, and we can clearly see black has a big attack here. So knight h2 is also interesting. So naturally, Zukertort did a prophylactical move with h3, and black played knight f8, a4, knight g6, and here in this position, white continued with b5. What else he's supposed to do? Maybe knight b3 was a choice, but b5 was played, and now black continued with knight h4. So notice this other maneuver, knight f8, knight g6, knight h4. Notice how, again, he's not castling, he wants to make sure he activates all his pieces. Since this knight is not going to be able to get to g4 very easily, this knight on d7 is not going to have a future unless this knight moves. So therefore, he tries to activate all his pieces. And that's another reason why we don't want to castle so quickly, because then the rook on f8 would be in the way. Knight f8, a4, knight g6, b5, and here black starts his brilliant play. Knight h4, g3. And here a lot of people would just play knight back to g6, using the fact that he created a weakness, and then the game would continue something like knight b3, queen d7, bishop f1, and even though black has a promising looking position, nothing that bad is happening yet for white. On the king side, white could sometimes flee the king to d2, c2. King looks pretty safe, and black does not have a clear breakthrough. In the meantime, white will have some pressure on the king side, queen side. So in fact, position is kind of unclear here. Who is actually even better? But that was a brilliancy by Steinitz. He saw the positional compensation after the move knight g2. Obviously, he saw the knight being trapped. But after king f1, takes, bishop takes g3, what did black get for the piece? He got 2 pawns, and also he opened the king wide open. But the main thing is, now it's so hard for the white king to really find home and shelter. This king would love to be somewhere on c2, but obviously it's going to be an eternity for it to get there. So here black has clear compensation in the long run, clear initiative, and it's clearly very difficult for white to play here. White played the only move. He tries to get rid of the bishop. Here's the only real moment where perhaps Steinitz kind of erred a little bit. I think in this position, the best move would have, after all, been a move like queen b8, with the idea to, after knight f1, play h4, and solidify this bishop. And here, the white king would still be stuck to its doom, and black has different ideas like rook h6, rook g6, and black would have big initiative here. Instead, bishop c7 was played, which is still good for black. White now played what I thought is inaccuracy. I think in this position, white should really somehow, one way or another, take care of this king. If this king stays on this part of the board, on the king side, in the long run it's going to be doomed. So one way or another, that king has to flee. One way to try to do that is by playing king f2, but then h4. So best move I think in this position would have been queen f1. And after the queen goes to d7, king f2. And then the king runs away. And here it's not as clear how black continues his initiative. Black still has compensation, but it's not as clear. So that's what white should have tried. Instead, he played queen g1. But as you'll see many times when we're gonna go over some other great players, sometimes the sacrifices weren't 100% sound. But of course, that sometimes, even though it might not be completely sound, the idea is it's hard for opponent to really make the best moves over and over again. And this is exactly the case. Sukhrud was a great player, but queen f1 was not necessarily an easy move to play. He played slightly wrong idea, queen g1. And immediately, black is already winning, after one seemingly innocent inaccuracy. Rook h8, king f1, rook g6, queen f2, and suddenly black just gets huge initiative. The queen is just misplaced on f2 because now king e1 runs into bishop g3, and black just gains a lot of tempos. Takes, takes, and also the h3 pawn is unprotected. So now rook g1 only move because the g3 square has to be protected. But now black's able to get a third pawn and continue with his raging initiative. So now the material is equal, but look at the position. White king is terrible, in terrible shape. Black king is completely safe. This bishop is bad. The minor pieces are really useless. And black's just winning. Bishop takes g4 is the only move, because after queen h4, knight takes e3. Rook takes g6, fg. Knight g2 is coming, and clearly black's winning. So bishop takes g4, bishop takes g4. Notice why bishop takes g4, taking away that exit square. Does not let the white king flee that easily. Knight e2, queen e7, knight f4, and rook h6. Bishop c3, g5. And now he uses the power of his compensation, the very strong pawns. Knight e2, rook f6, queen g2, and now a very strong move, rook f3, threatening rook takes c3, and black's completely winning. Knight f1, knight takes f3 is of course also hopeless. Knight f1, rook b8, getting the open file. King d2, f5, a5, f4, and basically the game is going to be a mop-up. Black's breaking through very soon. Rook e1, fe, knight takes e3, rook f2, queen takes f2. Yeah, and the rest of the game is not really that interesting. Bishop f2. You just have to be careful about some threats, but clearly white has no counterplay because the bishop protects the rook. And the rest of the moves really need no comment. Just had to make sure that king is safe here, but of course it completely is. One last trap. If queen takes f1, knight g3, and while it's still winning, it's unnecessary. So of course black played bishop f4, and now white just resigned because he's down too much material, and plus he's being attacked. So what did we learn from this game? Well, we learned about the beauty of positional compensation, combining initiative and positional compensation. And we learned about playing unconventionally sometimes. h5, knight f8, instead of automatically castling. That might be obvious to the modern top player, or even just a modern master. But to a 19th century player, not necessarily. So, that was good stuff by Wilhelm Steinitz. And this game was one of the games that set the tone for the match, which really went a long way to help him become the first world champion. So in chapter 3, we're going to cover the game from Steinitz, the last game from Steinitz. And in this game, it's going to be against Mikhail Chigorin, his second challenger for the World Championship match. And this is the first match when he was already officially a world champion, as far as I know. Or maybe he might have played another one against Sukertort after that as well. But the point is that Chigorin actually was able to give him even a better fight than Sukertort, because Chigorin was a very, very good dynamic player. But Steinitz still won the match, and this game was game number 20 of the match, and it's already towards the end of the match, and this was like one of the deal breakers. After this game, as far as I remember, Steinitz took control over the match. Before that, the match was relatively even. So this was a very important game, obviously, and Steinitz really played a masterpiece. So let's go through it step by step. So Steinitz played knight of 3, d5, d4, knight of 3, knight of 6, e3. So Steinitz played what's called the Kali system. Now, honestly speaking, I'm not sure if Kali invented this before Steinitz or after, but Steinitz also used this opening, and this is actually a relatively quiet system, which is quite good maybe against people who are good theoretically, and it's quite good against dynamic players, because this is really a solid positional game. So Steinitz was also a good psychologist. He knew what to play against whom, because he also played a lot of 1e4. He played a lot of sharp stuff as well, but against Chigorin, he wanted to play a solid positional game, which made a lot of sense. e6, c4, bishop e7, knight c3, knight d7, and here he just went ahead and played c5. So he's just simply trying to gain space. He's trying to fixate the structure and try to kill the dynamics in the position. Black played c6. He wants to play maybe b6 next move, and he wants to try to stabilize the queenside position. If b6, maybe he was afraid a little bit of c6, knight b8, knight e5, and this is double-edged, because on one hand this knight really might be short on squares, on the other hand this pawn might be weak. So it's not clear if this pawn on c6 is a strength or a weakness, but Chigorin decided not to go for this and decided to play it safe and play c6. b4, but now white's of course able to try to maintain that space. Castles, bishop b2. On a5, white was going to play b5, and now it's very hard to get b6 in, and white's going to be better, because either black will have to take, after which white gets very active pieces, black is passive with this bishop on c8, or after castles, at some point takes, this pawn might become weak. Maybe not right away, but later on perhaps. Maybe a move like rook b1 first, since black can't do anything anyway. Because this move actually helps black play bishop a6, so perhaps taking right away is not accurate, but later on maybe. So, but maybe b6 deserved attention with the idea to play a5 next move. In the game, he castled, bishop b2, queen c7, so he's playing for e5 at some point, bishop e2, knight e8. This move I'm not so sure about. He wants to play for f5, but I'm not sure if that structure is good for black, because he's making his bishop potentially a bad piece. So I think e5 should have been preferred, because in this position there are no real tactics with the discovery. So therefore, and if knight takes d5, of course that's a blunder, because of knight takes f3 intermediate check. So really black was fine here. So black probably should have preferred e5 here, and then play for e4, and this would have been a little bit similar to Steinitz's game with black against Sukertort, although there the bishop was on c7. Instead he played knight e8. I think a wrong strategy. Castles f5. And now I think white's already significantly better. queen c2, because now if black ever plays e5, his king's going to be weak. So black wanted to keep a close structure, stonewall structure. But this bishop on c8 is going to be a problem piece for him the rest of the game. a4, knight e4, b5. So white simply plays on the queen side. Rook f6. Okay, so that's really Chigorin's only active plan. He wants to play rook h6 and try to get some kingside attack. White plays on the queen side, a5. Knight takes c3. Well, this move I'm not really sure why he played that. I think rook h6 should have been tried, good or bad, and then try to play for an attack. And then this would have been maybe not so clear. Although I still think white's better, because after something like b6, queen b8, knight takes e4, f takes e4, knight e5, black really has no attack. And at some point white will break with f3 and the king might become weak. Instead he took on c3, but now white's play is just easier than easy. And then he played a6. So he must have thought that after takes, rook b1, rook f8, that he could make a draw, because it seems like there are no penetration squares for white on that b file. And it seems like there is no way for white to really break through here. But Steinitz shows that passive positions, especially when there is a bad piece, bad things will happen. Rook b2, bishop b7, rook b1, rook fb8, knight e1, knight goes to a square where it can attack potentially some weaknesses. Bishop c8, knight d3. Again, it still looks like black is completely fine. Rook takes, bishop f6. It seems like there's no entry points. It seems like there's just no way to break through. But in fact, nothing is farther from the truth. Queen a4. Now the c6 pawn is weak, so black can't play e5 anymore because of takes, and queen takes c6. Queen takes b2 and queen e8 mate. So black played king f7, queen a3, bishop d8. So black's just staying tight and trying to defend and asking Steinitz, show me what you got here. Bishop d1, rook b8. And finally we come to a critical moment. I'm sure Chigorin expected something along the lines of f3, rook takes b2, queen takes b2, queen b7, and while the position is passive, but it looks like it's very defensible. Sure, maybe white can break through with e4 at some point, but even that's not clear that there's going to be a breakthrough. Still, white's better even here, but this really seems like it might be defensible for black. After all, where's the breakthrough? Where's the knockout blow? Instead, though, Steinitz showed his class here. And some people say that Botvinnik might have been the first player who invented this kind of a sacrifice. But in fact, as we could see, Steinitz might have been the first one, at least the first world champion, who came up with this brilliant concept of putting the rook right in front of this knight, allowing the rook to be captured by that knight. So why would white just suddenly out of nowhere give up an exchange like that? Well, first of all, the idea is he wants to maintain control of the b file. That's the main thing. So if black doesn't take on b6, which probably his best move would have just been to go king g8, white would slowly build up the pressure with something like bishop e2, followed by knight b4, attacking this pawn, and try to play like this. But of course, the question is, what happens after black just takes? Well, we'll see. So white took here. But now, look at this position. Sure, we gave up an exchange, but look what we got for it. First of all, we got a monstrous passed pawn on b6, which basically kills black's rook. This rook on b8 now is completely almost useless. So the fact that white is down in exchange is not felt because black's advantage, quote-unquote advantage, his rook on b8, really is not felt because it's really so passive, it's closed. Rooks like open files, but when a rook is not an open file and it's just closed like this and really has no moves, it doesn't matter that technically speaking white's down in exchange. It means nothing because in this position this rook is not worth the full 5 points, whereas this knight is completely dominant. It has a lot of nice outpost squares and it's going to be a huge attacker. And now that black lost his knight on d7, in fact, now the dark squares are even more difficult to control. So therefore, in this position, the black knight on d7 was way better than the rook on b8 in some ways. And certainly the knight on d3 here is much, much better than the rook on b8. It has much more influence in the position than the black rook on b8. So therefore, this sacrifice just makes perfect sense. Not to mention, white will have initiative and an attack on the king. So let's see how this plays out. Black plays queen b7 in order to at least defend this pawn in case of a check. White crashes through with knight e5, king g8, bishop a4. Now he attacks the weakness. If he gets this pawn, he's already going to have a pawn for the exchange, and he's going to have continued pressure. But what is black to do? If black plays here, queen d6 will just win. Obviously here black will not be able to maintain everything. Black is just losing. So black played queen e7. But now, after bishop b4, queen f6, queen c3, clearly white is just going to break through. Knight takes e6, queen takes e6, they're all threats. And black with these horrible pieces really cannot do anything. h6, bishop d6, and it's not a surprise that black's going to have to give up material here. He played rook takes b6, but what else? If he plays rook b7, queen takes c6 is going to also win material. There's really nothing to be done here. Rook takes b6, a takes b6, bishop takes b6, queen takes c6, queen d7, queen d8, bishop c5, and now the rest is a mop-up. White's just simply up a piece with a better position. And now white wraps up the game with a nice kingside attack. Notice queen e8 might have been the simplest approach, but this would be a little bit of work to do, although it's still of course completely winning. But in this position, black's king is weak, so he doesn't even want to trade queens. He goes for a mating attack. And now this piece is also going to drop. And now white finally trades, although here also queen takes d7 was easier, would have won the second piece. But it's understandable that Steinitz eventually just went for this continuation, and of course Chigorin resigned because black's down a piece, no compensation in an endgame, and there's really no hope in this position. So what was the main thing we learned here from this game? We learned that fortresses are often meant to be broken, that just because the position looks solid but passive, it doesn't mean it's going to hold. Passive positions are meant to be broken. And whenever black has a bad piece, like this bishop on c8, whenever you have a bad piece, those are always very dangerous positions. And also this is a very important lesson about relative value of pieces. After rook b8, rook b6, white's happy to give up the rook for the knight because white's going to get a very strong passed pawn, which is going to tie black's pieces down. And in this position, the knight is going to triple in value, whereas this rook on b8 is going to deteriorate in value. And in this position, this knight that's usually worth 3 points and the rook that's usually worth 5 points, it's more like the complete opposite. Here the knight's the one that's dominating the game, clearly controlling the dark squares, whereas the rook on a closed file where it does nothing is clearly not worth its usual value. So these values of points of these pieces are all relative. You have to always judge based on the position. So these examples of Steinitz really show about how it's important to not just follow rules blindly, that you know, but always look relative to the position. You have to try to play what the position asks for. And if you play like that, very often you'll be surprised how successful you'll be at finding these nice ideas. We looked at 3 nice examples from the first world champion, Wilhelm Steinitz. And now we're going to move on to the second world champion, Emanuel Lasker. And basically, Lasker beat Steinitz to become the second world champion. And this is actually a game where he played against Steinitz. Now, this was actually not a world championship game, but still, I thought this was one of the more instructive games that, in regards to material positional sacrifice. So without further ado, let's get right to it. d4, d5, c4, e6. I think Steinitz, towards the later part of his career, he was already an older man. He was trying to play already more positional chess rather than crazy attacking, so he played d4 more often later on. Knight c3, knight f6, normal queen's gambit declined. Bishop f4, bishop e7, e3, castles, rook c1, c5. So Lasker was basically one of the founders of this Lasker system in the queen's gambit declined, involving the bishop on g5 and the knight on e4, which was used by Anand against Topalov in the decisive match, in a decisive game of their 2010 World Championship match. And bishop f4 systems have therefore become also very popular these days, and c5 is one of the main replies. So this is actually similar, the opening is similar to the modern day era chess. Takes, bishop takes, cd, ed, knight f3. Now knight takes d5 is a little too dangerous here, because after something like knight takes d5, rook takes c5, knight takes f4, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, ed, bishop e6. As we could see, white's still underdeveloped, his pawn's attacked, and black's going to be able to build up some initiative. So, therefore, knight takes d5 is not so recommended in this position. Although it's not losing or anything, but Steinitz preferred knight f3, knight c6, and bishop d3. Maybe that's a little bit inaccurate. Maybe it was better to play bishop e2, anticipating that black will play d4, because d4 can't really be stopped in a good way anyway. And this would just be an equal game. After bishop d3, white found himself in a little bit of trouble, because now after d4, ed, knight takes d4, black already has some initiative. Maybe even better was to play rook e8 check, and after bishop e2 to take first. But that's already a deep subtlety. Black took on d4 right away, and now white had a very strange looking move, knight e5, which might have stopped white's idea, but of course it's not an easy move to find, since normally we're taught to get castled as soon as possible and get developed. But this move actually is quite interesting, because now white doesn't have anything concrete, and white would possibly equalize after this move. Instead, he castled. But now black got to play for initiative with bishop g4, and already this pin here, it's a very annoying pin. White played knight b5, allowing already big concession. But if he goes bishop e2, this also is good for black, because now black gets piece activity, and black gets a 2 bishops advantage for free. So this would also be a little bit worse for white. Knight b5 was played. Bishop takes f3. Not knight takes f3, because then after gf, this bishop would be hanging. So that was the idea of knight b5. But bishop takes f3, gf, and now a strong move, knight e6, defending and attacking. And now black is better, because he's going to control this outpost square on f4. Bishop e5, knight h5, possibly bishop g3 was a little bit more accurate. Bishop on e5 is kind of loose. Knight h5, king h1, queen g5, bishop g3, rook a d8. We can clearly see black has very dangerous initiative here. It was also maybe possible to play knight ef4 right away, but rook a d8 certainly is a fine move. Queen c2, only defense, and also in the meantime attacking this pawn. Queen h6, rook d1, rook c8, queen b3, a6, knight c3, and now black plays a very interesting move. Now, the interesting thing about Lasker was he was actually very similar to Tal in a way. He would often sacrifice not 100% soundly, but he would basically play psychological chess. He knew maybe that the move is often objectively not the best, but mathematically, very often it's hard to prove it. So the idea is very often it might be objectively not the best, but it's very difficult to keep playing defensive moves, move after move after move, and keep trying to neutralize opponent's threats. Objectively speaking, the best move might have been to play b5 to basically, not sacrifice a pawn and keep all the advantages in the position. But then, though, white will play knight e2 and be able to grovel long, and black is better, but not more than that. Lasker plays a very interesting idea, knight d4, giving up this pawn, and now he's going to start an attack. Knight takes g3, fg, rook b8, queen takes a6. Otherwise, black gets the pawn back. Queen takes a6, rook b6. Of course, Lasker has foreseen that. Otherwise, this makes no sense for black. Queen c4 only move. Actually, every other move loses. Let's say if he tries queen a5, which looks like a good move. After rook takes a2, h4, queen e6, there's no more defense. Queen e6 being the key move. So queen c4 is a very important move to keep the square under control. Steinitz found that move. Rook takes b2. Again, h4 is the only move here, because if white would play knight e2, then after bishop a7, black would actually be better. Black would have continued the initiative, and it's hard to find the next move for white. h4 was a very precise move. Bishop a7. The initiative keeps going, and immediately, okay, so bishop e4 is still okay. Maybe it was knight a4 might have been a try, but then white had a very interesting idea of playing queen d6, knight takes b2, queen takes g3, and the position is very complicated, but basically it's pretty good for black after knight takes f3, but it's super complicated. Of course, black can also play rook bb8 with compensation. It's not an easy position to play. There are a lot of ideas. Bishop e4 is probably okay, queen d5 was also fine, but white's not better here, despite the fact that white's up a pawn. And whenever it's a position where objectively black is... Whenever it's a position where the side who's down material is objectively fine, that usually means that the side who is down material has a practical advantage, because that means they have very strong compensation, and it's harder for usually the opponent to play in that case. So bishop e4 was played, that's still okay. Queen d6, f4, only move. Knight a4 would lose to rook b4, or even queen takes g3. So f4 only move. Queen d7, another strong move. And now finally, after a bunch of only moves, eventually Steinitz cracked. His only move here was to play f5 to keep the position intact. But then black still had pressure. He could try queen d6, and clearly he has good compensation. But at least white is surviving. But as you could see, most people would prefer to be black here, because it's just so hard to play for white. Let's say rook c8, queen d3, queen c7, rook c1, queen e5. Clearly, this is a position where you'd rather be black, because black has all the activity. and white has to just find only moves to try to defend. Up to a while, Steinitz was able to, but eventually, even Steinitz, the world champion, cracked and played the move bishop g2. And now, black is already completely winning, with a very powerful move queen g4. Now, I'm not sure what exactly Steinitz missed, but at this point, there's already no more save. And black's just threatening queen takes g3, with basically mating ideas. And what can white do? There's not much white can do here. If he tries rook takes d4, queen takes g3, there's just simply no defense from a lot of these mates. So white also can try knight e4, but then after knight f5, then there are again too many threats. Rook takes g2 is a threat, knight e3 is a threat, knight takes g3 is a threat. Cannot defend all of them. If queen here, bishop comes to e3, threatening knight takes g3. And again, there's just simply no defense from this position. You can analyze it a little bit on your own, but there's really no defense. For example, rook f3 is a good line. Rook takes g2, king takes g2, knight takes h4. So white tried queen d3, but still knight f5, knight e4, and now the key move bishop e3. Knight e3 was tempting, but Lasker was not a materialist. He wanted the maximum. He played for the maximum. Here white was able to defend by giving back the exchange. And while black should be winning in the long run, there's still some technical difficulties. Bishop e3 is just a killer move. And that's why good advice is, by the way, it was given by Lasker himself. And here he uses his own advice perfectly. He was, I think, the first one who said, I think it's a famous quote by him, when you see a good move, look for a better move. And that's exactly what he did here. Most people, at least players below 2000, when they would see a move like knight e3, and they would see it's safe, it wins the exchange, they would just play it. But it's a very important habit. It's very important to get into the habit of, even when you see a good move, try to always look for a better move, because that better move can really put the game out of reach. And sometimes the good move might be a good move, but it might not be the best move. So it's very important to always try to look for the best move, even when you see a good looking move. And that's exactly what Lasker did here. Rook f3, and now white won the game decisively. Now black won a piece. And again, we can try to look for another defense, but there really is none. For example, he can try queen d7, but after queen e2, rook g1, takes. Now black still wins the exchange, but now he's going to win more than that. But after rook f3, the game is lost. Black's up a piece and still attacking, and finally he brought in the pawn to basically finish the deal, seal the deal. And now the rook, the last game and the last piece into play. Notice how he made sure that not only he makes loft, but also plays aggressively. Move that does two things at once. And finally, he played this move, rook takes a3, after which white resigned, because the line goes like this: after rook takes a3, queen takes a3, check, check, forced mate. Of course, at this point, anything was winning, including h4, but Lasker wanted to win brilliantly. Although I would have preferred h4, because after rook takes a3, you have to still calculate a few things. Yes, black is completely winning, but why calculate all that out when, in my opinion, a move h4 is just simpler, and white absolutely cannot do anything. So, what was the main thing we learned from this game? Well, first of all, in the end, when we're attacking, when you see a good move, try to always get into the habit of looking for a better move, because sometimes a good move might not be a knockout, there might be still a defense for your opponent, but the best move might just be a knockout. And if you sell yourself short and don't look for the best move, very often you'll blow a lot of very nice positions, because you'll give your opponent extra lives in their game. And also, this game introduces the practical value, where the sacrifice maybe was not purely necessary, and at first the computer even thinks that it was not objectively the best move, but it won black the game. It made Steinitz's life much, much more difficult. So even though the position was equal instead of equals over plus, let's say mathematically, this equal position was much harder for Steinitz to play than if had it been like equals over plus, where Steinitz would have had defensive resources and Steinitz would have been much more comfortable. So it's very, very important to keep that under consideration. Psychology, not just objectivity, but psychology is also very important. And it's very instructive how Lasker continued to play energetically throughout the initiative, kept making threats, and played really, really nice.